A black waitress defends a Hell's Angel when cops harass him in her diner, never imagining what's about to happen next. One moment she's just serving coffee. The next, she's standing up to 2 armed officers in front of the whole town. Everyone freezes, because no one's ever dared to speak to them that way. But when that biker walks out into the rain and whispers, "No one's ever done that for me," something changes. The next morning, she hears it before she sees it. Hundreds of roaring engines filling the streets. 200 bikers have come back, for her. What began as one act of courage becomes a battle between faith and fear, love and hate, mercy and revenge. The whole town is about to learn what real justice looks like. Because when one woman stands for what's right, how far will heaven's angels ride to stand with her? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The autumn rain drums against the windows of Billy's diner, creating a steady rhythm that mingles with the soft clink of coffee cups and quiet murmur of conversation. Droplets trace lazy paths down the glass, distorting the neon signs that cast their warm glow into the wet darkness outside. Inside, the fluorescent lights hum softly overhead, illuminating the worn red vinyl booths and chrome-edged counters that have served this small southern town of Willow Creek for decades. Darlene Hayes moves between the tables with practiced grace, her sensible shoes making soft sounds against the checkered floor. Her hands ache from carrying heavy plates and wiping down tables, but she keeps her movements steady and deliberate. Each step is accompanied by a whispered prayer, something she's done since losing James 2 years ago. The familiar words bring comfort as she works through another late shift. "The Lord is my shepherd," she murmurs, topping off Mr. Anderson's coffee cup. The elderly regular barely looks up from his newspaper, where he's been studying the same page for the last hour. At the counter, 3 regulars huddle over their cups, their voices rising and falling as they discuss the town's troubles. "Property taxes going up again," one grumbles. "Can't hardly make ends meet as it is." "Government don't care about folks like us anymore," another adds, shaking his head. Darlene keeps her thoughts to herself, though her heart aches at their words. Times are hard for everyone in Willow Creek, but she believes in keeping faith and showing kindness no matter what. The medical bills from James's illness still weigh heavy on her shoulders, but she refuses to let bitterness take root. The bell above the door chimes, and a gust of cold air sweeps through the diner. A massive figure fills the doorway, well over 6 feet tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a rain-soaked leather jacket with patches. Water drips from his gray beard as he removes his helmet, revealing weathered features and eyes that have seen too much of life's harder side. The diner goes quiet. Forks pause halfway to mouths. Coffee cups freeze in midair. Rex Donovan's reputation precedes him. Ex-Hell's Angel, mysterious loner, subject of countless small-town whispers and speculation. Darlene watches as Rex makes his way to the counter, his heavy boots leaving wet prints on the floor. His movements are careful, almost gentle, as if he's aware of how his size might intimidate others. He settles onto a stool, keeping his eyes down. Before Darlene can reach for the coffee pot, the door chimes again. Deputy Carl Jensen and Officer Benson step in, their uniforms dark with rain. Deputy Carl's hand rests casually on his belt, too close to his holster for comfort. His eyes narrow as they land on Rex's patched jacket. "Well, well," Deputy Carl drawls, moving closer to the counter. "Didn't expect to find one of your kind in here tonight." Officer Benson hangs back slightly, his younger face showing uncertainty, but he follows his superior's lead. The tension in the diner rises like steam from a hot cup of coffee. Rex doesn't turn around. "Just want some coffee," he says quietly, his voice gravelly but controlled. Sure about that? Deputy Carl steps closer, his boots squeaking on the wet floor. Because seems to me like your type usually brings trouble wherever they go. Darlene's hands tighten around the coffee pot she's holding. She sees the way Rex's shoulders tense, the slight clench of his jaw. But he remains still, dignity in his silence. What's the matter? Deputy Carl continues, his voice getting louder. Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you're planning something we should know about? He's a customer like anyone else, Darlene finds herself saying, her voice stronger than she feels. She moves forward, coffee pot still in hand, positioning herself between Rex and the officers. Deputy Carl's face darkens. Ma'am, you don't know what you're dealing with here. These bikers, they're all the same. Nothing but trouble and judge not that ye be not judged, Darlene quotes, her voice clear and steady despite the trembling in her hands. Matthew 7, verse 1. She meets Deputy Carl's angry stare with quiet determination. This man came in for coffee, nothing more. He's done nothing wrong, and you have no right to treat him this way. Let him drink in peace. The silence that follows feels heavy enough to touch. Officer Benson shifts uncomfortably, looking between his partner and Darlene. The other customers pretend to be absorbed in their meals, but their attention is fixed on the scene unfolding before them. Deputy Carl's face flushes red. His hand tightens on his belt as he leans forward. You'd do well to remember your place, he says, his voice low and threatening. Some folks in this town might not take kindly to certain people getting too uppity. Darlene feels the sting of his words, but stands her ground. My place is right here, serving customers with respect and dignity. Something you might want to think about, Deputy. Officer Benson touches his partner's arm. Carl, maybe we should... We're done here, Deputy Carl snaps, cutting him off. He backs away, pointing a finger at Rex. We'll be watching you. His glare shifts to Darlene. Both of you. The officers leave, the door slamming behind them hard enough to rattle the windows. The rain outside seems louder in the silence they leave behind. Slowly, the other customers return to their conversations, though their voices are quieter now, more subdued. Darlene's hands shake as she finally pours Rex's coffee. She can feel the eyes of everyone in the diner on her, some concerned, others disapproving. But when she looks up, she meets Rex's gaze and sees something there that steadies her: respect, gratitude, and a hint of wonder. Ain't nobody ever stood up for me before, he murmurs, his rough voice gentle. His weathered hands wrap around the coffee cup, as if it's something precious. Thank you, ma'am. Darlene manages a small smile, though her heart is still racing. Name's Darlene, she says softly. And everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, Mr. Donovan. No exceptions. The rain continues to fall outside, washing the streets of Willow Creek clean, while inside Billy's diner, an unlikely moment of grace hangs in the air between a widow and a biker, witnessed by the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the steady drip of coffee into cups. The morning light struggled through heavy clouds as Darlene Hayes made her way down Cedar Street toward Billy's diner. Her sensible shoes clicked against the wet sidewalk, each step measured and purposeful despite the unease that sat heavy in her stomach. Last night's confrontation with Deputy Carl played over and over in her mind like a broken record. Her mama had always told her to stand up for what was right, but in a small southern town like Willow Creek, doing the right thing sometimes came with consequences. Darlene's hands fidgeted with the strap of her worn leather purse as she walked, her lips moving in silent prayer. Lord, give me strength for whatever comes today, she whispered, her breath visible in the chilly morning air. The familiar shape of Billy's diner emerged through the morning mist. But something was different. Darlene stopped short, blinking in surprise. The old neon sign that had been flickering and sputtering for months now shone steady and bright against the gray sky. The letters Billy's Diner glowed a cheerful red, clear and strong as the day they were first installed. "Well, I'll be," Darlene murmured, a small smile tugging at her lips despite her worries. As she approached the diner's entrance, she noticed a motorcycle parked in the lot, clean and well-maintained, unlike the rough machines she usually associated with bikers. The chrome gleamed even in the dim morning light. The bell above the door chimed as Darlene stepped. Inside, the familiar smell of coffee and bacon greeting her like an old friend. Her eyes immediately went to the counter, where a familiar figure sat. It took her a moment to recognize Rex Donovan. His gray beard was neatly trimmed, and his leather jacket had been cleaned of road dust. He looked almost distinguished, though the faded tattoos on his hands still hinted at his rougher past. "Good morning, Miss Darlene," Rex said, his voice carrying the same quiet strength she remembered from the night before. A faint smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Mr. Donovan?" she replied, surprised by how glad she was to see him. "You're out and about early today." "Wanted to thank you proper for last night," he said, standing up from his stool. He was still imposingly tall, but something about his demeanor seemed softer in the morning light. "Nobody's shown me that kind of kindness in a long time." Darlene hung her purse on the coat rack, trying to wave off his thanks. "Just did what anyone should have done." "But they didn't. You did." Rex pulled out his wallet, laying down several bills next to his coffee cup. "The coffee's worth every penny, and then some." Darlene noticed he'd paid double the usual amount. Before she could protest, Rex cleared his throat. "Also noticed your back faucet's been giving you trouble. Heard it dripping all night. Mind if I take a look?" "Oh, you don't have to," Darlene began, but Rex was already heading toward the kitchen, tool belt in hand that she hadn't noticed before. For the next hour, while Darlene prepared the diner for opening, the sound of Rex working on the faucet filled the background. She was surprised by how naturally he seemed to fit into the morning routine, his presence neither intrusive nor uncomfortable. Occasionally, she'd hear him humming old gospel songs under his breath, and it made her wonder about the story behind this man who seemed to contain so many contradictions. When he finally emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a rag, the persistent drip that had driven everyone crazy for weeks was finally silent. "Should work fine now," he said, gathering his things. "Changed out the washers and tightened everything up. Might want to have someone look at the water pressure, though. It's running a bit high." "Mr. Donovan, I don't know how to thank you," Darlene said, genuinely touched by his kindness. Rex paused at the door, that faint smile returning to his face. "Not all angels got wings, Miss Darlene," he said softly. "Some just ride Harleys." With that, he was gone, the rumble of his motorcycle fading into the morning traffic. Darlene stood for a moment, processing his words. There was something in his voice when he'd said it, a hint of pain, maybe, or regret, that suggested depths she couldn't begin to understand. The day passed in its usual rhythm of coffee pours and plate deliveries, but Darlene's mind kept drifting back to Rex's visit. As evening approached and the dinner rush wound down, she found herself telling Marlene about the events of the past 24 hours, while they wiped down tables together. "Girl, what were you thinking?" Marlene exclaimed, pausing mid-wipe to stare at Darlene. "Standing up to Deputy Carl like that? You know how these folks are. They don't like troublemakers." "I couldn't just stand there and watch them treat that man that way," Darlene replied, straightening a stack of menus with perhaps more force than necessary. Marlene shook her head, her gold earrings catching the light. "I know your heart's in the right place, Darlene, but you need to be careful. This town ain't always kind to people who rock the boat." "Maybe the boat needs rocking," Darlene muttered, then caught herself. "I hear you, Marlene, I do. But sometimes the Lord puts us in positions where we have to choose between what's easy and what's right." "Just promise me you'll watch your back," Marlene said, her usually sharp tone softened with genuine concern. "I don't like the way Deputy Carl was looking at you when he left last night." As closing time approached, Darlene found herself alone in the diner. The chairs were up on tables, the floors mopped, and the kitchen spotless. She stood by the front window, keys in hand, looking out at the quiet street. The repaired sign cast a warm glow on the wet pavement, and somewhere in the distance, she heard the low rumble of a motorcycle. "Lord," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass slightly. "Please keep Mr. Donovan safe, wherever he is tonight." She paused, thinking of his kind eyes and the pain she'd sensed behind them. "And Lord, thank you for sending him here. I think maybe we both needed a reminder that there's still good in this world." What Darlene couldn't know, as she locked up the diner and headed home, was that word of her confrontation with Deputy Carl was already making its way through Willow Creek. In diners and barber shops, on front porches and in church halls, people were talking about the quiet widow who'd stood up to injustice with nothing but scripture and conviction on her side. But that was a story for another day. The afternoon sun struggled behind thick clouds that rolled across the sky like dark bruises, promising rain, but holding back. Inside Billy's diner, Darlene wiped her brow with the back of her hand as she carefully arranged fresh-baked pies in the rotating display case. The sweet scent of apple and cinnamon filled the air, mixing with the ever-present aroma of coffee and grilled onions. "Lord, give me strength to make it through this shift," she whispered, her joints aching from the morning's work. The lunch rush had been particularly busy, and her feet were already protesting the long hours ahead. The first rumble came so low and distant that Darlene almost missed it. She paused, pie server hovering over a perfectly golden crust, thinking it was thunder. But the sound didn't fade like thunder should. Instead, it grew stronger, deeper, more mechanical. The unmistakable growl of motorcycle engines, not one or two, but many. Many turned out to be an understatement. Through the large front windows, Darlene watched in astonishment as bike after bike pulled into the parking lot. They came in waves, choppers, cruisers, touring bikes, their chrome catching what little sunlight filtered through the clouds. The riders, dressed in leather and denim, seemed to materialize from every direction, filling the gravel lot until there was barely space to walk between the machines. Inside the diner, conversation stopped mid-sentence. The clatter of forks against plates fell silent. Regular customers pressed against windows or ducked low in their booths, while others clutched their phones nervously. "Oh my word," Martha, one of the regular customers, whispered. "There must be hundreds of them." 217 to be exact, a voice called out from the door, and Darlene turned to see Rex Donovan's broad figure filling the entrance, his weathered face split by an unexpected grin. Without thinking, Darlene rushed outside, her heart hammering against her ribs. The rumble of engines was dying now as bikes were shut off one by one, leaving behind a symphony of leather creaking and boots crunching on gravel. "Mr. Donovan," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "What in heaven's name?" Rex's eyes twinkled with mischief, so different from the guarded look she'd seen just yesterday. "Told the boys about you," he said, gesturing to the crowd of bikers who were now gathering around them. "About what you did last night. We figured we'd repay a kindness." A tall woman with silver-streaked hair stepped forward, extending her hand. "Name's Rachel," she said warmly. "Rex here told us how you stood up to those cops. Not many people would do that for one of us." Before Darlene could respond, more bikers approached, each introducing themselves. There was Big Mike from Augusta, Pastor Jim, who really was a pastor, Sarah the schoolteacher, and dozens more. They weren't the threatening gang members some might expect. They were mechanics, nurses, veterans, small business owners. Each had a story, each had a smile, and each treated Darlene like she was long-lost family. "Well," Darlene said, wiping tears from her eyes with her apron, "I suppose y'all better come in and get something to eat." The diner erupted into controlled chaos. Every booth and counter seat filled immediately, with more bikers standing, waiting patiently for their turn. Darlene and her small staff rushed to keep up with orders, but nobody complained about the wait. Instead, stories and laughter filled the air, along with the scent of fresh coffee and sizzling burgers. "Here," said a young biker with a full sleeve of tattoos, pressing a $100 bill into Darlene's hand after paying for a $15 meal. "Keep the change." This scene repeated itself throughout the afternoon. Tips that made Darlene's eyes water, kindness that made her heart full. She lost count of the hugs, the thank yous, the stories shared. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows through the windows, Darlene found herself learning more about this unexpected community. Rex moved through the crowd like a proud father, introducing people, sharing jokes, making sure everyone was taken care of. "You see," he explained quietly during a rare calm moment, "most folks judge us before they know us. But you? You just saw someone who needed defending. That means something to people like us." The moment was shattered by the sudden flash of red and blue lights in the parking lot. Through the windows, Darlene saw 3 police cruisers pull up, followed by the mayor's sleek black SUV. The diner fell silent as Mayor Henry Caldwell strode in, his face flushed with anger. Police Chief Thompson followed close behind, hand resting meaningfully on his gun belt. "Mrs. Hayes," the mayor said, his voice clipped and cold, "what exactly do you think you're doing here?" Darlene straightened her spine, though her hands trembled slightly. "Serving customers, Mr. Mayor, same as I do every day." "This is clearly an unauthorized gang gathering," Chief Thompson cut in. "It's a public safety hazard." "These are paying customers," Darlene protested, gesturing to the peaceful crowd. "They haven't caused any trouble." Mayor Caldwell's lips twisted into a thin smile. "Perhaps not, but I've just received some very concerning reports about safety code violations in this establishment. I'm afraid we'll have to shut you down immediately." "Safety violations?" Darlene's voice rose. "This diner passed inspection just last month." "New violations," the mayor said smoothly. "Very serious ones. We'll need everyone to clear out while we conduct a thorough investigation." Rex stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. "This ain't right, and you know it." "Sir," Chief Thompson's hand tightened on his weapon, "I suggest you and your friends leave now, before we have to take official action." The bikers began to rise, not in surrender but in controlled anger. Rachel touched Darlene's shoulder gently. "Don't worry, honey, this isn't over." One by one they paid their bills, leaving tips that brought fresh tears to Darlene's eyes. They hugged her, promised to return, assured her that justice would come. Rex was the last to leave, his eyes dark with fury but his voice gentle. "We take care of our own," he said simply, "and your family now." Darlene stood in the parking lot, watching as 217 bikes roared to life. The sound was deafening, a protest in itself. Above her, the diner's sign, so recently repaired, went dark as the power was cut. Her apron was damp with tears she hadn't realized she'd been crying, but her back was straight as she watched her newfound family disappear into the gathering dusk, their taillights like red fireflies in the distance. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Darlene Hayes sat on the concrete steps of Billy's Diner, clutching a paper cup of coffee from the gas station down the road. Her eyes kept drifting to the bright orange sign that hung crookedly on the diner's door. Closed by order of town council. Safety violations pending investigation. The coffee tasted bitter and wrong, nothing like the rich brew she'd been serving at the diner for the past 12 years. Her fingers traced the rim of the paper cup as she watched people hurry past, their whispers carrying on the morning breeze. "Always knew that place was trouble," muttered Mrs. Peterson from the flower shop, not quite under her breath. "Mixing with those biker types," came another voice. "What did she expect?" Each comment stung like a paper cut, small but sharp. Darlene straightened her back and lifted her chin, just as her mama had taught her all those years ago. "Hold your head high," she whispered to herself, "even when your heart is low." The rumble of a motorcycle engine cut through the morning quiet. Rex Donovan's Harley rolled to a stop in front of the diner, its chrome catching the sunlight. He killed the engine but stayed seated for a moment, taking in the scene, the sign, the locked door, Darlene's slumped shoulders. "This ain't right," he growled, swinging off his bike. His weathered face was tight with anger, but his voice softened as he approached her. "You doing okay, Miss Darlene?" She managed a weak smile. "I'm vertical and breathing, Mr. Donovan. That's something." "Rex," he corrected gently. "Mr. Donovan was my daddy, and he wasn't worth remembering." He settled beside her on the steps, his leather jacket creaking. "You shouldn't have to sit here taking their judgment." "Where else would I be?" Darlene asked, gesturing with her cup. "This diner's been my life since Thomas passed. Our savings, our retirement, it's all tied up in this place." Rex was quiet for a long moment, watching another group of locals cross to the other side of the street rather than pass directly in front of them. "Let me take you for a ride," he said suddenly. Darlene blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "A ride, on the bike." He stood up, offering his hand. "Sometimes you need to get above it all to see things clear. Trust me on this." Darlene hesitated, looking at his outstretched hand. Her mama's voice echoed in her head about proper behavior, about what people would say. But then again, people were already talking. "I've never been on a motorcycle before," she admitted. Rex's smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "First time for everything. I've got a spare helmet, and I promise to drive careful-like." After another moment's consideration, Darlene took his hand and stood. "Lord help me," she murmured, but there was a spark of rebellion in her eyes. Rex helped her with the helmet, showing her how to secure the strap, then demonstrated how to mount the bike safely. "Hold on to my waist," he instructed. "Lean when I lean and relax. The bike knows what it's doing." The engine roared to life, and Darlene's arms tightened around Rex's middle. They pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the whispers and judgment, the locked door, and the crooked sign. As they cleared the town limits, Darlene felt something shift inside her. The wind whipped at her clothes, and the countryside opened up before them. Rolling hills, scattered farmhouses, fields rippling with late summer corn. She found herself relaxing, even enjoying the sensation of freedom that came with the ride. Rex took them along winding back roads, past old barns and grazing cattle. After about 45 minutes, he turned onto a gravel path that led up to a high overlook above the Willow Creek River. The view was breathtaking. The water below caught the sunlight like scattered diamonds, and the surrounding hills stretched out in endless waves of green and gold. They dismounted, and Rex produced 2 bottles of water from his saddlebag. Darlene removed her helmet, laughing as she tried to smooth down her wind-tousled hair. "I haven't felt this alive in years," she admitted, accepting the water. They settled on a weathered wooden bench that faced the river. For a while, they just sat in comfortable silence, watching hawks circle lazily overhead. "I need to tell you something," Rex said finally, his voice rough. "About who I was, who I am." Darlene turned to face him, noting how he stared straight ahead, his fingers working at the label on his water bottle. "I used to ride with the Hells Angels," he continued. "Not just ride with them. I was chapter president for 15 years. Did things I ain't proud of. Things that kept me awake at night." He took a deep breath. "Had a son, Michael. His mama left when he was little, couldn't handle the life. I tried to raise him right, but he grew up around the wrong influences. Around drugs." His voice caught, and Darlene reached out, laying her hand gently on his arm. "There was this party," Rex went on. "Big gathering at our clubhouse. Michael was 17. Someone sold him pills. Bad ones. By the time we found him..." He shook his head. "That was 8 years ago. I left the club the next day. Been trying to make it right ever since." "Oh, Rex," Darlene whispered. "Started a legitimate bike repair shop. Got some of the younger guys jobs there, helped them get clean. Started a scholarship fund in Michael's name for kids who want to learn a trade." His laugh was bitter. "Trying to balance the scales, I guess. But some folks, they only see what they want to see. The tattoos, the leather, the past." "God sees more than that," Darlene said firmly. "He sees a father's broken heart. He sees every step you've taken toward redemption." Rex finally turned to look at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You saw more too. That night at the diner. You saw past all this." He gestured to his leather vest, his tattoos. "I saw someone who needed defending," she said simply. "Just like you see someone who needs help now." They stayed at the overlook until the sun began to sink toward the horizon, talking about loss and faith, about second chances and the weight of judgment. As the day cooled, they reluctantly mounted up for the ride back to town. The peace they'd found at the overlook shattered as soon as they pulled up to the diner. Fresh graffiti marred the white-painted walls, angry red letters spelling out "traitor" and "thug lover." Someone had broken one of the front windows, and glass glittered on the sidewalk like cruel stars. Rex's hands clenched into fists, but Darlene moved past him to stand under the flickering streetlight. Her lips moved in silent prayer as tears rolled down her cheeks. "Lord," she whispered finally, loud enough for Rex to hear, "help them find mercy in their hearts. Help me find strength in mine. Turn their hatred into understanding, their fear into love." Rex stood beside her, his own head bowed, as the streetlight buzzed and flickered above them, casting alternating light and shadow over the wounded diner. The days after the vandalism crept by slowly. Each morning, Darlene would walk past the shuttered diner, her heart heavy but her spirit unbowed. The closed-by Order of Town Council sign seemed to mock her, but she refused to let it break her resolve. On the third day, while cleaning out her small home kitchen, an idea struck her. She might not be able to serve in the diner, but her hands could still cook, her heart could still serve. She started small, just a few extra meals prepared alongside her own dinner. She packed them carefully in disposable containers, adding handwritten notes with Bible verses about hope and perseverance. Rex showed up that evening on his motorcycle, concerned when he hadn't seen her at her usual spot on the diner steps. When she explained her plan to deliver meals to those in need, his weathered face broke into a rare smile. "I know just the folks who could use some good cooking," he said, patting his bike's saddlebags. "Got room for plenty in here." The next day, they delivered hot meals to 3 homeless veterans who lived under the highway overpass. The men's faces lit up at the sight of home-cooked food, meatloaf, green beans, and Darlene's famous cornbread. One of them, an older man with silver hair, had tears in his eyes as he ate. "Been a long time since anybody cared enough to cook for us, ma'am," he said softly. Word spread quickly. Truckers who used to stop at the diner started showing up at Darlene's modest house, offering gas money for deliveries. Rex recruited some of his biker brothers to help, their motorcycles forming impromptu delivery convoys. The sight of leather-clad bikers carefully carrying boxes of hot food became a common sight around Willow Creek. A week into their effort, a young reporter from the local news station caught wind of the story. She showed up one morning, as Darlene was loading containers into Rex's saddlebags. The resulting piece, though brief, captured the heart of what was happening. They called her the Angel of Willow Creek, showing clips of her cooking in her tiny kitchen, of Rex and his friends making deliveries, of grateful recipients sharing their meals. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The morning after the broadcast, Darlene opened her front door to find boxes of food donations piled on her porch. Church groups sent casserole dishes. Local farmers dropped off fresh vegetables. An anonymous donor left an envelope containing $500 in cash with a note that read simply, "Keep cooking, Angel." Darlene stood in her kitchen one morning, surrounded by donations and volunteers who had come to help cook, when inspiration struck her like a bolt of lightning. "The Angel's table," she said out loud, causing Rex to look up from where he was washing dishes. "Come again?" he asked. "That's what we'll call it when we reopen," she explained, her eyes shining. "The Angel's table, where everyone's welcome, no exceptions." Rex dried his hands slowly, considering. "Folks might not like that idea much." "Then they'll have to learn," Darlene said firmly. "Jesus didn't turn anyone away from his table, and neither will we." The transformation began the very next day. Rex brought in his biker brothers, many of whom, it turned out, had skills in construction, electrical work, and plumbing. They worked for free, refusing even meal payment, though Darlene insisted on feeding them anyway. The outside of the diner got a fresh coat of paint, covering the hateful graffiti. Someone donated lumber, and the bikers built a beautiful deck for outdoor seating, complete with planters for flowers. Inside, they repaired broken fixtures, installed new lighting, and gave everything a deep clean that would have made any health inspector proud. What touched Darlene most deeply was the quiet support that began trickling in from unexpected sources. Mrs. Peterson from the First Baptist Church, who had crossed the street to avoid Darlene just weeks ago, showed up with new curtains she had sewn herself. The high school art class painted a beautiful mural on one wall, a diverse group of people sharing a meal together under angel wings. One Sunday evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Darlene stood in the parking lot, looking at her transformed diner. The new sign gleamed proudly. "The Angel's Table, all are welcome here." The flower boxes overflowed with late summer blooms, and the fresh paint practically glowed in the sunset light. "We're coming back," she whispered, feeling tears of joy well up in her eyes. "We're really coming back." "That we are," Rex's deep voice came from behind her. He held the door open, gesturing for her to enter. Inside, the renovated diner sparkled. The chrome fixtures shone, the new upholstery gleamed, and the mural seemed to come alive in the golden evening light. They settled into a booth, their booth, as Darlene had come to think of it. Rex produced 2 plates of her signature apple pie, served on the new dishes donated by the ladies' auxiliary. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his coffee cup. Darlene clinked her cup against his, smiling. They ate in comfortable silence, sharing occasional glances and soft laughter. The peace that filled the space felt almost holy, a healing balm for two souls who had carried their own kinds of pain for far too long. As they finished their pie, Darlene noticed how naturally Rex fit into the scene. This tough ex-biker with his leather vest and tattoos, sitting in her diner like he'd always belonged there. Maybe he had. Maybe they all did. Every lost, lonely, judged person in Willow Creek. That's what the Angels' Table would be, a place of belonging, of second chances, of love served alongside coffee and pie. The setting sun cast long shadows through the windows, but inside the Angels' Table, light and hope filled every corner. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The morning sun painted Willow Creek in shades of gold, its warm rays catching the fresh paint and polished windows of the Angels' Table. Darlene stood in the parking lot, watching the sunrise with nervous anticipation fluttering in her stomach. Her hands trembled slightly as she unlocked the front door, the key feeling heavier than usual. "Lord," she whispered, "guide us through this day." Rex's motorcycle rumbled into the lot at 6:30, right on schedule. He'd been showing up early every morning since they started renovations, and today was no different. But there was something special in his bearing. He'd traded his usual work clothes for a clean pressed shirt under his leather vest. "Ready for the big day?" he asked, climbing off his bike. Darlene managed a shaky smile. "Ready as I'll ever be." Inside, everything gleamed. The chrome fixtures sparkled, the newly upholstered booths invited sitting, and the fresh coffee smell mixed perfectly with the scent of baking biscuits. The kitchen staff, all volunteers for opening day, had arrived at 5 to start preparing. The clatter of pots and pans mixed with excited chatter as they worked. By 11:30, the parking lot was already full. A line stretched around the building, locals curious about the transformation, truckers who'd heard about Darlene's home-cooked meals, church members who'd helped with donations, and bikers who'd assisted with repairs. Even a few police cruisers pulled in, their officers looking somewhat uncertain but drawn by the festive atmosphere. At exactly 12 o'clock noon, Darlene opened the doors. The crowd poured in, filling every booth and counter seat within minutes. The jukebox, restored to working order by Rex's mechanical skills, played soft gospel tunes that floated above the buzz of conversation. Before the first meals were served, Darlene stepped to the center of the room, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "If y'all wouldn't mind," she said, "I'd like to say a quick prayer." The room fell silent. Even those who normally wouldn't have participated bowed their heads out of respect. "Dear Lord," Darlene began, her voice carrying clearly through the quiet diner, "we thank you for second chances, for bringing together strangers as friends, for turning hurt into healing, and for showing us that your table has room for everyone. Bless this food and the hands that prepared it, and Lord, help us remember that love served with a humble heart can change the world. Amen." "Amen," echoed through the room, and then the festivities truly began. The kitchen moved like a well-oiled machine. Plates of Southern comfort food streamed out, golden fried chicken, fluffy biscuits smothered in gravy, collard greens seasoned to perfection, and pie that made people close their eyes in bliss with the first bite. The miracle wasn't just in the food, though. It was in the way the room came together. A suited businessman shared a table with a leather-clad biker, swapping stories about their kids. Mrs. Peterson from the Baptist church sat with Officer Benson, who'd sheepishly apologized to Darlene that morning. At the counter, a group of truckers taught the local librarian how to play 5-card stud with sugar packets. Around 2 o'clock, a local television news van pulled up. The reporter, Sarah Chen, had heard about the Angels' Table through social media, Pictures of bikers building the deck had gone viral in certain circles. She set up her camera in a quiet corner and interviewed Darlene between serving rounds. "What made you decide to stand up that night?" Sarah asked, referring to the incident with Rex. Darlene thought for a moment, wiping her hands on her apron. "It wasn't really a decision," she said finally. "When you see someone being judged unfairly, being kind isn't a choice. It's a duty. We're all God's children, even if some of us ride Harleys and others wear badges." The interview continued, with Darlene sharing the story of the closure, the community support, and the transformation into the Angels table. By evening, the segment had been picked up by national news networks, and Darlene's phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications from social media shares. "Black waitress who defended biker inspires movement," read one headline, accompanied by a photo of Darlene and Rex standing in front of the diner's new sign. Rex watched it all from his spot at the counter, pride evident in his usually stern features. He'd barely moved all day, preferring to observe the fruits of their labor. Every time someone complimented the food or the atmosphere, his chest swelled a little more. As the day wound down and the last customers filtered out, Rex disappeared briefly to his bike. When he returned, he carried a carefully wrapped package. "Got something for you, Miss Darlene?" he said, his voice gruffer than usual with emotion. Darlene unwrapped the package with careful fingers. Inside was a leather vest, not new but well cared for, with the soft patina that only years of wear can create. "This was Jimmy's," Rex said quietly, referring to his late son. Had it cleaned and added something special? On the back of the vest, a new patch had been carefully stitched. "Faith Rider," in elegant script, with angel wings spreading out from the letters. Tears welled in Darlene's eyes as she ran her fingers over the patch. "Rex, I can't take this. It's too precious." "That's exactly why you should have it," he insisted. "Jimmy would have loved what you're doing here, what we're all doing here." With trembling hands, Darlene carried the vest behind the counter. She hung it carefully on a special hook she'd had installed, right where everyone could see it. The leather caught the light from the setting sun, making the Faith Rider patch seem to glow. As they finished cleaning up, rain began to fall outside. Gentle this time, nothing like the storm that had brought Rex to the diner that first night. The drops tapped softly against the windows, creating a peaceful rhythm that matched the contentment in their hearts. "Listen to that rain," Darlene said softly, pausing in her work to look out the window. Rex nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Different kind of rain tonight." "Yes," she agreed, smiling. "This one feels like a blessing." The gentle rain continued as they finished closing up, washing the world clean, preparing it for whatever tomorrow might bring. But for now, in the Angels' table, peace reigned supreme, a testament to what could happen when faith, courage, and second chances came together under one roof. The late September sun warmed the Angels' table's freshly painted walls as Darlene hummed gospel tunes, moving between tables with practiced grace. 3 weeks had passed since opening day, and the diner had found its rhythm. Busy mornings with truckers and early risers, steady lunch crowds mixing bikers and business people, peaceful afternoons with retired folks sipping coffee and sharing stories. Most of the town had begun to warm up to the changes. Sheriff Thompson now came in regularly for lunch, tipping his hat to Rex, who'd become a fixture at the counter. Even Deputy Carl stopped by occasionally, though he kept his visits brief and quiet. But not everyone had opened their hearts. Darlene noticed the sideways glances from certain customers, heard the whispered comments about troublemakers and mixing with the wrong sort. She chose to meet each dark look with a smile, each muttered insult with extra kindness. That's what her mama had taught her, and that's what her faith demanded. One Tuesday morning, Rex arrived earlier than usual, his weathered face creased with worry. In his hand, he held 2 crumpled papers. "Found these stuck to the door when I rode past last night," he said, laying them on the counter. Darlene's hands trembled as she smoothed out the notes. The first one, written in angry black marker, read, "Go back where you belong." The second was even more chilling. "We don't want your kind here." "Lord have mercy," she whispered, but kept her voice steady. "Well, they'll have to be more specific. Which kind are they objecting to? The black folks, the bikers, or just people who serve good pie to everybody?" Rex didn't smile at her attempt at humor. "This ain't funny, Darlene. These kinds of threats, they ain't always just talk." "I know that better than most," she replied, thinking of stories her grandmother had told her about the old days. "But I won't let fear chase me from doing what's right." Throughout the day, Rex kept a watchful eye on the diner, stepping outside periodically to scan the parking lot. His biker brothers stopped by more frequently too, ordering coffee and lingering longer than usual. That evening, they had planned their first Veterans and Widows supper, a free meal service Darlene had dreamed up to honor both her late husband James and Rex's military service. The dining room filled quickly with elderly veterans in their service caps, war widows clutching faded photographs, and younger veterans still carrying the weight of recent conflicts in their eyes. Darlene had prepared her best comfort food: fried chicken, mac and cheese, collard greens, and sweet potato pie. The smell of home cooking filled the air, mixing with laughter and conversation. Old Mr. Jenkins, a World War II veteran, shared stories about serving in the Pacific. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose husband never returned from Vietnam, showed everyone pictures of her grandchildren. Rex worked the room like a natural host, his gruff exterior softening as he talked with fellow veterans. He seemed especially gentle with the widows, pulling out chairs and refilling coffee cups with unexpected grace. "You've got a good man there," Mrs. Wilson, one of the church ladies who'd recently started helping out, whispered to Darlene. "He's not my man," Darlene protested automatically. "He's just Rex." Mrs. Wilson just smiled knowingly and went back to serving pie. As the evening wound down and the last guests began gathering their coats, Darlene felt a deep satisfaction. This was exactly what she'd hoped the Angels' Table would become, a place of healing, of coming together, of breaking down the walls that kept people apart. Then she smelled it. At first, just a hint of something burning, like someone had left toast in too long, but this was sharper, more chemical. Rex noticed it too. His head snapped up, nostrils flaring. "Something's wrong," he growled, already moving toward the kitchen. The smell grew stronger. Then someone shouted from outside, "Fire! The back of the building's on fire!" Everything happened at once. Rex burst through the back door, grabbing the garden hose they used to wash down the parking lot. Darlene called 911 with shaking fingers while helping the remaining elderly guests to safety. Smoke began pouring through the ceiling vents. The flames moved impossibly fast, eating up the old wooden structure like it was kindling. Rex fought against the fire with desperate determination, but the garden hose was useless against such fury. The heat pushed him back, but he kept running forward, trying to save anything he could. "Rex!" Darlene screamed as he disappeared into the smoke again. "Please, it's not worth your life." He emerged moments later, coughing violently, clutching the ancient brass cash register, the one that had been in the diner since before Darlene started working there. As he stumbled away from the building, she saw his leather jacket was scorched, angry red burns visible on his arms. The wail of fire engines filled the air, but Darlene knew in her heart they were too late. The fire had found its way into the walls, into the roof. The old building didn't stand a chance. She watched in horror as the flames consumed everything: the counter where Rex sat every morning, The booth where she'd first stood up to the police, the kitchen where she'd cooked countless meals with love and prayer. The heat forced everyone back as windows shattered and walls began to buckle. With a sound like a dying giant, the roof collapsed inward. Sparks flew into the night sky like evil fireflies. The firefighters worked to contain the blaze, but the angel's table was already gone. Darlene felt her knees give way. Rex caught her before she fell, holding her steady despite his own injuries. She clutched his scorched jacket, breathing in the smell of smoke and leather, and screamed, a sound of pure anguish that came from somewhere deep in her soul. "My diner," she sobbed. "Everything we built, everything we tried to do." Rex's arms tightened around her as they watched their dream turn to ash in the growing darkness. The gathering crowd stood in shocked silence, the only sound the crack and roar of the flames and the hiss of water from the firefighters' hoses. The brass cash register lay forgotten on the ground beside them, its once shiny surface now blackened with soot, a single artifact saved from the inferno that had devoured all their hopes and hard work. The night crept toward dawn with agonizing slowness. Darlene sat on an overturned milk crate outside what remained of the angel's table, her shoulders wrapped in a scratchy emergency blanket that did little to ward off the autumn chill. Thick smoke still rose from the blackened skeleton of her diner, carrying with it the acrid smell of burned dreams. Her face, streaked with tears and soot, felt stiff and foreign. Every few minutes, she reached up to wipe her eyes, leaving fresh, dark smudges across her cheeks. The paramedics had wanted to take her to the hospital, too, to check for smoke inhalation. But she'd refused. She couldn't leave, not yet. Not while pieces of her life still smoldered in the ruins. The image of Rex being loaded into the ambulance played over and over in her mind. He'd been conscious at first, fighting the paramedics, insisting he was fine despite the angry red burns marking his arms and chest. Then he'd collapsed, his big frame going suddenly limp, and they'd rushed him away with sirens wailing. "Second-degree burns," they'd said. "Smoke inhalation." Words that made her stomach twist with guilt. Camera flashes punctuated the darkness as reporters gathered like vultures. Their questions came rapid-fire, some gentle, others sharp with accusation. "Ms. Hayes, can you tell us about the threats you'd received? Were you insured for the full value of the business? Sources say you were having financial troubles. Any comment? Is it true you were harboring known criminal elements?" Darlene pulled the blanket tighter, trying to make herself smaller, to disappear into its folds. But there was no hiding from their hungry cameras, their probing questions, their barely concealed insinuations that maybe, just maybe, she'd burned down her own business for the insurance money. The crunch of gravel announced new arrivals. Darlene looked up to see two familiar figures approaching through the pre-dawn gloom, Deputy Carl Jensen and Officer Benson. Their badges caught the red and blue lights still flashing from emergency vehicles. "Well, well," Deputy Carl drawled, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Quite a show you put on tonight, Ms. Hayes." Darlene's throat tightened. "Please," she whispered. "Not now." "Oh, I think now's the perfect time," Carl continued, moving closer. "While everything's still fresh, while the evidence is still hot, you might say." Officer Benson shifted uncomfortably behind him, but said nothing. "What are you talking about?" Darlene asked, though she already knew. The accusation had been building in Carl's eyes since the moment he arrived. "I'm talking about arson, Ms. Hayes." He spat the words like poison. "I'm talking about how convenient it is that your little publicity stunt was starting to fade from the news and suddenly, whoosh, up in flames it goes." "That's not true," Darlene protested, her voice breaking. "I would never..." "Never what? Set a fire for attention? For insurance money?" Carl's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "You've been playing the saint, haven't you? The poor widow who took in bikers and criminals, made herself out to be some kind of angel, but we see through it." "Those were good people in there tonight," Darlene said, rising shakily to her feet. "Veterans, widows, I was trying to help them." "And now one of your biker friends is in the hospital," Carl pressed. "Convenient witness, unconscious with burns. Can't tell us what really happened, can he?" Tears spilled fresh down Darlene's cheeks. "Rex tried to save my diner. He risked his life." "Or he helped you set it," Carl interrupted. "Either way, we'll be pressing charges. Arson's a serious crime, Ms. Hayes, even for angels." Something broke inside Darlene then. Not her spirit, but the dam holding back her anger, her pain, her fierce dignity. "You can take my diner," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You can take my reputation. You can even take my freedom if you're determined enough to twist the truth. But you cannot take my faith. You cannot take my knowledge of what's right and true before God." Carl's face reddened. "Is that a confession?" "It's a testimony," Darlene answered. "And the Lord knows who lit that fire tonight. He knows every heart in this town, Deputy Jensen, even yours." The deputy's hand twitched toward his belt, but Officer Benson finally spoke up. "Carl, come on. We should go. Fire marshal's waiting to talk to us." Carl glared at Darlene for a long moment before turning away. "This isn't over," he called over his shoulder. "Not by a long shot." Darlene watched them leave, their shadows stretching long in the emergency lights. When they were gone, her strength deserted her, and she sank back onto the milk crate, shaking. Hours later, as the sun finally began to paint the sky in shades of gray and pink, Darlene made her way home. Her feet felt like lead, each step an effort of will. But nothing could have prepared her for what she found. Crude letters sprawled across her white siding in angry red spray paint. "Biker trash." The words seemed to pulse in the growing light, each letter a fresh wound on her heart. She fumbled with her keys, barely able to see through her tears, and stumbled inside. The house felt empty, haunted by the events of the night. She made it as far as the kitchen before her legs gave out. Darlene fell to her knees on the linoleum floor, her hands pressed against the cool surface. "Lord," she sobbed, her words catching in her throat. "Lord, I tried to do good. I tried to show your love to everyone who came through those doors. Why did you let it burn? Why?" Her prayers dissolved into wordless weeping. She pulled herself up to sit at the kitchen table where Rex's gift, the leather vest with its Faith Rider patch, lay folded neatly. She'd brought it home just days ago, meaning to have it framed. Now it seemed like a relic from another life, a reminder of everything she'd lost. Her head sank onto her arms, exhaustion finally overwhelming grief. The vest lay beside her like a fallen flag, its patch catching the first real light of morning. As consciousness slipped away, Darlene's lips moved in one final prayer. "Lord, help me understand. Help me keep believing in your purpose." She drifted into uneasy sleep there at her kitchen table, tear tracks drying on her cheeks, while outside her vandalized home, the sun rose on a town divided between hatred and hope. The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when Darlene stirred from her fitful sleep. 2 days had passed since the fire, each hour marked by grief and questions without answers. She hadn't even changed the sheets on her bed, spending most nights dozing in her armchair, Rex's vest clutched close like a security blanket. The first rumble was so distant, she thought it might be thunder. But the sound grew steadier, deeper, a familiar rhythm that made her heart skip. Motorcycles. Not one or two, but many. Darlene pushed herself up from her chair, her joints stiff from another night of poor rest. The rumbling grew louder, filling the air with a sound like rolling thunder. She shuffled to her front door, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled dress, and stepped out onto her porch. The sight before her stole her breath away. Motorcycles lined her street as far as she could see, chrome glinting in the morning light. There were hundreds of them, maybe even 1,000. Bikers in leather vests stood beside their machines, some holding American flags, others carrying handmade signs, "Justice for Darlene," and "Angels Never Walk Alone." But it wasn't just bikers. Mixed among the leather-clad riders were familiar faces from her diner days, veterans in their service caps, pastors in their collars, families with children holding small flags, Mrs. Peterson from the quilting circle, Tom Washington and his wife from the hardware store. Even Pastor Eli stood near the front, his white hair gleaming in the sun. "We ride for Darlene," the chant started soft, then grew. "We ride for Darlene. We ride for Darlene." News vans lined the curb, cameras rolling as reporters gestured excitedly. Darlene recognized the Channel 5 logo, and there was even a truck from a national network. A young reporter rushed forward, microphone extended. "Ms. Hayes, how do you feel about this show of support? We're getting reports of donations pouring in from across the country. Your story has gone viral." Before Darlene could answer, her phone buzzed. The hospital's number flashed on the screen. Her hands trembled as she answered, fear gripping her heart. Was it bad news about Rex? But Rex's gruff voice came through clearly, broadcast live as someone held a microphone to her phone. "Darlene, you hearing all this out there?" "Rex," she gasped. "Are you all right?" "Better than all right. Listen, they're letting me say something on TV right now." His voice grew stronger, filled with emotion. "If she could stand up for me that night in the diner, the least we can do is stand up for her now. That's what faith looks like, folks. That's what love looks like." Darlene's legs gave way. She sank to her knees on the porch steps, tears flowing freely as the crowd cheered. Pastor Eli stepped forward, laying a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said softly. "Sometimes he lets things burn so something better can rise from the ashes." Her phone buzzed again, Mayor Caldwell's number this time. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something made her answer. "Ms. Hayes," the mayor's voice was carefully controlled. "I think it's time we discussed rebuilding options. The town council is prepared to fast-track all necessary permits." Darlene barely heard the rest. She looked out at the sea of faces, bikers and church ladies, veterans and school teachers, all standing together in her street. The morning sun caught the chrome of the motorcycles, the gleam of the news cameras, the tears on weather-worn cheeks. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "Thank you for showing me your purpose." The chant grew louder, rolling down the street like waves of thunder. "We ride for Darlene. We ride for Darlene." And in that moment, on her knees in the morning light, surrounded by so much love and support, Darlene Hayes finally understood. Sometimes angels came with wings, sometimes they rode Harleys, and sometimes they showed up in ways no one could have expected. Within weeks, the charred remnants of the angels' table transformed into something miraculous. Where ashes had scattered across broken concrete, a new foundation emerged, stronger than before. The constant bang of hammers and whir of power tools filled the air from sunrise to sunset. Church ladies set up a food station under blue tents, serving sandwiches and sweet tea to the workers. Bikers in leather vests worked alongside men in suits, passing lumber and raising walls together. Even Deputy Carl and Officer Benson showed up one morning, quietly picking up hammers and joining the work crew without a word. The change in the community was as solid as the new concrete being poured. Old prejudices seemed to wash away with each day's sweat. Mrs. Peterson from the Baptist church worked the food line next to tattooed men with graying ponytails, sharing recipes and stories. When Rex finally returned from the hospital, his arm still bandaged but his spirit unbroken, the whole worksite erupted in cheers. Though doctors told him to take it easy, he insisted on helping hang the new sign, a gleaming creation that read, "The Angel's Table," in elegant script, with small angel wings worked into the design. On opening day, the crowd stretched around the block. News crews set up their cameras as children darted between adults' legs and old friends hugged on the sidewalk. The morning sun caught the fresh paint and new windows, making everything sparkle. Darlene stood at the entrance, wearing a crisp new apron, her eyes glistening with tears. Rex stood beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder as she stepped up to the microphone. "Hate burned this place down," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "But love built it back stronger. That's what happens when we choose forgiveness over fear, when we find courage to see past our differences." The crowd burst into applause. Inside, fresh coffee percolated, and pies cooled on racks. Laughter and conversation filled the space where silence had reigned, and the sweet scent of hope drifted through the open doors. The Angel's Table bloomed into more than just a place to eat. It became the beating heart of Willow Creek. Every Sunday, the aroma of fresh biscuits and gravy welcomed those who couldn't afford a meal. The free food Sundays turned into a weekly celebration of community, with volunteers serving alongside Darlene. Veterans claimed the corner booth as their own, sharing war stories over endless cups of coffee. Their laughter mixed with the clink of silverware and the soft hum of gospel music from the jukebox. Even Mayor Caldwell, who once tried to shut them down, became a regular at the Thursday morning prayer breakfasts. Darlene's Mercy Nights every Wednesday became standing room only events. People from all walks of life shared stories of redemption and second chances, their voices trembling with emotion as they spoke of overcoming addiction, rebuilding broken marriages, or finding faith after despair. On one particularly crowded evening, Deputy Carl Jensen stepped through the door. The room hushed. His uniform was pressed, but his shoulders slumped with the weight of conscience. He stood before the crowd, hat in hand, his voice barely steady. "I was wrong," he said, looking first at Rex, then at Darlene. "I judged you both without knowing your hearts. I let my badge become a shield for my prejudice. I'm asking, can you forgive me?" Rex, who stood near the counter, crossed the room in 3 long strides. Without hesitation, he extended his hand. Their handshake spoke volumes in the silence. Darlene wiped tears from her cheeks as she approached them both. "That's what angels do, son. They forgive," she said softly. The diner erupted in sniffles and quiet sobs, hardened bikers dabbing at their eyes with paper napkins, church ladies embracing one another, and Deputy Carl receiving pats on the back from those he once scorned. A full year passed, bringing changes to Willow Creek that no one could have predicted. The town that once drew lines between its people now proudly called itself the Heart of Mercy, thanks to their community initiative called Ride for Mercy. National magazines featured Darlene's story, inspiring folks across the South to open their hearts and their diners to everyone who walked through their doors. On this particular spring morning, sunlight streamed through the Angel's Table's spotless windows. Darlene's hands moved with practiced grace as she brewed the day's first pot of coffee. Through the window, she watched Rex adjusting the chrome on his Harley. His leather vest now bore a patch that read, "Faith Rider's Chaplain," in bold stitching. Naomi, a young waitress with bright eyes and a determined spirit, paused while setting up tables. Once a scared runaway, she'd found both work and family at the diner. "Miss Darlene," she asked, her voice soft with curiosity, "why did you stand up for him that night?" Darlene smiled, pouring a steaming cup of coffee. Because mercy's the only thing that's never wasted, she answered simply. She stepped outside into the warm morning light, letting the rumble of distant motorcycles wash over her. The sound carried across the highway like thunder, spreading her message of mercy far beyond Willow Creek's transformed streets. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.